Hey everybody, it's Mr. Smedes, and today I want to talk about what beavers, wolves, and mangrove trees all have in common. So if you're ready to think like a mountain and write like a scholar, let's get started. Now, before we get into what these three incredible species all share in common, make sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. It's been a really busy couple months putting together the Apes Ultimate Review packet, but now that I have more free time, I'm going to be posting every week leading up to the exam in May. And if you want study guides for all 9 units, practice quizzes, practice FRQs, 2 full-length practice exams, all with answer keys, hop down in the video description below and grab your copy of the Ultimate Review Packet. I've already heard from tons of APE students and teachers that they're finding it really useful, so go check out Unit 1 for free and see how great it is. And if you've already purchased the Ultimate Review Packet and you're finding it useful, drop a comment below. What I love about using a digital product as opposed to a physical book that's signed, sealed, and delivered the day you buy it is that I can update the Ultimate Review Packet at any time. So if you think of a new feature you'd like to see, drop me a comment below and I'll see what I can do between now and the exam in May. Now, if you're still wondering what the heck wolves, beavers, and mangrove trees have in common, let me help you out here. They are all textbook examples of keystone species, but they're not just examples of keystone species, they're examples of the 3 different categories of keystone species, and we'll go over those 3 types of categories here, as well as understanding what a keystone species actually is. Now, the term keystone comes from the world of architecture, where stonemasons would use a wedge-shaped stone at the top or the apex of an arch in order to stabilize both sides. And just like an archway collapses without its keystone, ecosystem function begins to fall apart in the absence of keystone species. So you can think of a keystone species as one that's so critical to its ecosystem that removing it could jeopardize the stability of the whole food web or lead to other forms of ecosystem collapse. Now, just like all types of scientists like to put things into categories, ecologists like to put keystone species into categories. So we'll start off today with the most familiar category of keystone species, which is the apex predator. And just like the apex stone or the keystone in an archway sitting at the top and stabilizing both sides, apex predators sit atop the food web and stabilize the herbivore populations beneath them through predation. And wolves are one of the best examples of apex predators functioning as a keystone species in their ecosystem. See, in the forest ecosystem they often inhabit, wolves prey on large herbivores such as deer and elk. And this predation plays a vital role in preventing the overpopulation of these large herbivores. Without the population control provided by wolf predation, these 4-legged lawnmowers are allowed to breed and feast on the forest unchecked, which allows them to strip off the leaves and the bark of many young trees in a forest. We can see this in Yellowstone National Park, where the removal of wolves in the 1930s resulted in dramatic elk overgrazing on the park's aspen and willow populations. However, wolves do way more than just control the populations of large herbivores. Their kills often serve as hubs of activity for other scavengers that may not be able to bring down an elk or deer on its own, but will gladly clean up the scraps. Coyotes, bears, ravens, eagles, all of these scavengers will gladly move in and take care of what's remaining of a wolf kill after the wolves have had their fill. In fact, grizzly bears have even been known to chase off wolves from a kill midway through their meal. Now, the removal of wolves from ecosystems doesn't just mean less food for scavengers and larger populations of herbivores, it also dramatically changes the actual structure of the ecosystem. New tree growth is stunted as saplings are overgrazed. Stream banks widen and crumble as the riparian plants that held them in place are overgrazed on. And species like beaver that depend on the willow tree no longer colonize the area's rivers. Speaking of beavers, that brings us to our next category of keystone species, the ecosystem engineer. See, when these industrious little rodents dam rivers and streams, they convert what was once flowing water into standing ponds of water, which creates habitat and drinking water source for a whole variety of different organisms that depend on this standing pond. In fact, researchers in the western US have found that in addition to providing drinking water sources and habitat for other species, beaver ponds can also fight fires. And one of these scientists is Professor Joe Wheaton from Utah State. He's a geomorphologist who's demonstrated the stunning effect that beaver-dammed wetlands have in slowing the spread of wildfires. Building on this observation, eco-hydrologist Emily Fairfax's team published a recent paper that found beaver-dammed wetlands suffered 3 times less fire damage than surrounding areas during wildfires. And these beaver ponds don't just serve as a refuge for other species that may be fleeing the effects of fire, they can actually act as natural fire breaks in the landscape, preventing the fire from spreading further. And in this sense, beavers are functioning as more than just ecosystem engineers for their natural ecosystems. Their wetlands are also lessening the damage that these fires have on valuable rangelands that ranchers depend on. So we've talked about apex predators and ecosystem engineers in the form of wolves and beavers, but what kind of AP environmental science teacher would I be if I didn't give you an example from the plant kingdom? Enter the mighty mangrove tree. Stabilizer of shorelines and nursery for numerous aquatic species, these salt-tolerant trees and shrubs are the literal foundation of many estuary ecosystems. But to understand their role as a keystone species in these ecosystems, ecosystems, we actually have to go below the surface of the water and start with their complex root structure. Mangrove trees are characterized by these tangled masses of prop roots that help them cope with the constantly changing tides, help them stay anchored in the case of storm surges, and allow them to survive in the salty waters of these estuary ecosystems. And these roots all weave together, almost forming a sort of net that stabilizes the actual coastline against the constant force of the ocean's waves. Now, this dense, interweaved root system also is able to act as a filter, trapping many pollutants and producing cleaner water along the coastlines where mangroves are found, which has earned them the nickname kidneys of the coast. All right, I'm done with the alliteration, sorry. In addition to the stabilizing and filtering roles that mangroves play, their roots also serve as a nursery habitat for the juvenile stage of many fish and invertebrates, as well as an adult stage habitat for many bird species. In this way, mangroves are similar to beavers in that they alter the landscape of their environment and provide a multitude of economic benefits to humans. The fishing industry depends on mangroves as a breeding ground for commercial fish species, and the tourism industry depends on mangroves as stabilizers for the beautiful shorelines that draw in visitors, and nearby property owners and business owners benefit from reduced storm repair damage due to the ability of these mangroves to buffer wind speeds and absorb excess stormwater. Now, before we wrap up our review of keystone species here, I want to be crystal clear about their definition and help you avoid a mistake that I've seen ape scholars make in the past. See, as an experienced apes teacher and someone who's graded FRQs for the College Board, a common mistake that I see students make is thinking that a keystone species is just a really important one. And this is a great example of how not to write like a scholar. I mean, you might as well write that trees are good and oil spills are bad. And what I mean by this is we know that all species in their ecosystem have some level of importance. But what separates a keystone species is that its benefits are so widespread that its ecosystem could potentially collapse in its absence. Now, if we want to look at a released FRQ from 2017, we can see an actual College Board approved definition of what a keystone species is. Students on that year's exam were expected to either use the stability-based definition of a keystone species or to describe the species' large ecosystem effect relative to their abundance. Another way that ecologists phrase this is saying that keystone species have an outsized effect on their ecosystem. What this means is that their effects on the ecosystem are far greater than you would expect based sheerly on their population numbers in that ecosystem. Hopefully after this video, you have a better understanding of how to define a keystone species and how they can hold ecosystems together or create entirely new ecosystems that didn't exist before. And if you did, go ahead and smash that like button, head into school tomorrow and be the keystone scholar of your apes class. Be that student that stabilizes class, contributes to discussions, and creates opportunities for your group mates to think like mountains and write like scholars.